If you had asked me a year ago what fear smells like, I would have said hot dust and bleach. That was the first scent that met me when the super Mr. Ketter jimmied the stiff door of 4B and waved me into the dim, unfamiliar apartment that would be my home. The hallway lights buzzed with a low, insecty hum, and somewhere a television murmured laughter with no joy in it. The elevator cables thrummed in the bones of the building like a giant's arteries. "You'll get used to the noise," he said, as if noise had weight, and he had set a heavy bag in my hands. I told him I would, because that's what you say when your boxes are already in the van and your lease is signed. The rent was cheap, the location convenient. The gray brick building, once a tailor's shop with apartments tacked on like afterthoughts, had a charm you only saw when you squinted. Carved stone faces over the entry, a patchwork of stained glass in the foyer, a cracked tile floor that must have been beautiful before someone washed it with something too strong for too long. 4B smelled like a recently erased mistake. New paint over old stains, bleach and lemon oil trying to cancel each other out. The window was a window technically, but it faced an air shaft that gulped light and exhaled it as a colder thing. You could stretch your arm out and touch the wall of the building across the shaft if you were tall or careless enough. The view was of other windows, and if you looked down, a shabby square of concrete, as if the sky had dropped a handkerchief and forgotten it down there. "Noise travels," Ketter said. "It's a quiet building, mostly, so you'll fit fine." He had a pocket full of keys like a medieval jailer, and the habit of looking past you, as if he was perpetually waiting for someone more interesting to arrive. His face had that unhealthy pink you get from living in basements. "Who lives next door?" I asked, not because I cared yet, but because you make conversation when you're standing in your own echo. "Folks," he rolled a shoulder. "Families, students. People keep to themselves. If you need anything, laundry's down in B. Don't prop the fire door. Don't pour grease down the sink. You know, the rules." He left me with 2 brittle, laminated pages of rules and the numb feeling of a new key in my hand. When the lobby door slammed behind him, I heard it in my floorboards a few seconds later, as if the building was a slow listener. I told myself to love it, because love is a practice. I slid open the window, let the shaft breathe at me, and started dragging boxes from the hall. That first afternoon, tired made everything tender. The light was thin and yellow by the time I stacked my books on the built-in shelf and unfolded the old futon that had followed me through 3 cities. I partitioned my life into little piles. Cups, plates, a single saucepan, the tools you use to make the apparition of normal. The apartment was long and narrow, with a skinny kitchen along one wall like a train galley. The bathroom at the end was tiled in white squares, hairline cracked and grouted the color of tea. The mirror over the sink was new, its edges too clean for the rest of the place. I didn't meet my neighbors that day, unless you count the eyes I felt through the peepholes as I carried in my lamp, my plant, the cereal boxes I'd promised myself not to logistically eat for dinner. Doors open a crack, a chain slipping and catching, a throat cleared, the whisper of a lock that was too many locks. On the door across from mine, 4C, a child had drawn 2 concentric chalk circles at knee height, pale as old bone. On the landing, someone had left a blue bowl, the cheap kind you buy in stacks, half filled with cloudy water. A folded paper napkin sat beneath it, as if it needed a coaster. When I went down to return the dolly to the van, a man in a brown corduroy coat stood by the mailboxes and pretended to read a flyer about recycling plastic. He had eyes like a goldfish, large, bulbous, not quite pointing the same direction. When I looked at him, he smiled too slow. "New," he said, not a question. "Yeah." I gave him the quick, neighborly smile that asks for nothing. "I'm Alex, 4B. He did not offer his name. He nodded, turned the flyer upside down as if that would help, and asked me where I worked. His coat smelled faintly of cigarettes and old oranges. "I write copy," I said. "Freelance stuff." "You've got the kind of face that remembers things." He said it warmly, and I couldn't tell if it was praise. "Noise travels," he added, as if that had been a chunk of advice he liked repeating. "Don't answer the door after midnight." "Oh," I laughed like he was joking. "Trick-or-treaters," he said. "Any night of the year." His smile stalled, then resumed, and I took that as my cue to go back upstairs. As I passed the second floor, I heard the thin clink of a chain being set, then reset, and the whisper of someone's slippers on linoleum. Every floor smelled slightly different. Floor 3 like frying onions, floor 2 like laundry musk, floor 5 like the inside of a medicine cabinet. By the time I had eaten cereal with my saucepan spoon and stacked my flattened boxes by the chute, the building had settled into night noises. The elevator's cable sang now and then, plumbing throat cleared in the walls, a muted laugh track rose and fell like breathing. I sat on my futon, leaning my head back, watching the rectangle of the window fade to a deeper rectangle. The first knock came at 11:48 p.m. 3 knuckles on wood, the sound of it traveling from the other side of my door into my floorboards, up my spine. Not a frantic knock, not the help me that demands a call to the police, just a polite expectation. I stood. There was something about hearing knock, knock, knock in a new place that made you aware of your body like a stranger. I had no furniture between me and the door yet, no hallway table to hide behind, no habits. I walked barefoot, quiet across the unswept floor, and put my eye to the peephole. The hallway stared back at me, fat with its own dimness. 4C's chalk circles glowed faintly like algae. The blue bowl helplessly reflected a slice of the yellow ceiling light. No one. I waited, because that's what you do. The heat clicked in the pipes. Somewhere a glass clinked on a counter. I was about to break the silence with a small, embarrassing hello when something moved at the edge of my peephole's fisheye. The shadow of feet facing away from my door when they should have been facing it. The legs were inches from my threshold, but pointed down the hall. The shadow did not come from a body. "Can I help you?" I said to the wood, to my own quaking diaphragm. Silence pooled like dirty water. A rustle, cloth against the door. The tiniest whisper, so close it was almost not sound. "Hello." It was my own voice, so soft I might have imagined it. A static shadow version of how I say the word when I pick up a phone. I pulled back from the peephole so fast I smacked my head against the doorframe. Some primal, unarguable part of me was already trying to be in another room. My mind, obligingly late, provided rational scenarios. Someone imitating me in a prank, a TV echo, the particular acoustic hallucinations of new places. I stood very still and listened until my heartbeat made a shape out of the silence. No more knocks came that night. I slept badly, swimming up and down the dark with every clink and groan the building made. At 3:13 a.m., I woke to the distant slow lap sound of something, the blue bowl maybe, sliding along tile, and again to the far-off bark of a dog in a courtyard. When the sky was finally the color of the inside of a seashell, I showered and watched the new mirror fog up in concentric circles, as if someone had held their mouth to it and breathed deliberately. I told myself I should introduce myself to the neighbors. Make an ally or two. It would ease the odd feeling that I had been added to something mid-sentence. I baked brownies from a mix because it was the friendliest thing I could do with a single saucepan, and carried them on a cutting board door to door. 4C did not open, but the chain lifted, and a single gray eye peered at the brownies through the seaweed of the gap. "Thank you," said a woman's voice. She opened enough for a vein-lined hand to snake out, receive the foil, and retreat. "Hi," I said, leaning into the gap like sunlight. "I'm Alex, 4B. "Flo?" she said, as if names were items you should hand over carefully and never fully. "Don't use the laundry at night." "Because it's noisy?" "Because it knocks," she said, and closed the door. On 4A, a door with too many locks opened briskly when I knocked, as if my knock had been rehearsed. 2 locks remained set, but a triangular wedge of a face appeared. A middle-aged woman wearing a serious cardigan, a string bag of onions over a chair behind her. She took in my smile, my brownies, my unease like items at a grocery checkout. "You're new," she said. "I'm Heshla. My advice is—" She leaned out further, lowering her voice. "On the first Friday of the month, tape your vents." I laughed with the wrong amount of confusion. "Tape my—" "Every vent. Duct tape, cloth tape, painters, whatever you have. They say it's superstition, but what is superstition except instructions someone's written down because it worked once?" She tapped the door with 2 fingers, almost affectionately. "And salt your threshold, just to be neighborly." "Okay," I said, because I could not think of any reply that didn't sound rude. "Brownie?" She took one. She did not say thank you. "Noise travels," she said, as if it were the building's motto, Don't answer the door if the peephole shows your own eye. I carried the last of the brownies to the far end of the hall. The man in the corduroy coat from the mailboxes answered 4D this time. Up close, his eyes were no less striking, large and too full of shallow light. He took a brownie, placed it on a saucer as if it were something he would examine later with instruments, and said, "Tico, nice to meet you." "Do not feed the air," he said gravely. I looked at the bracket of the airshaft window and tried to guess if Tycho was making fun of me. "Okay. You laugh, but you will not laugh tonight." He tilted his head just enough to be unsettling. "Noise travels. I've heard." He smiled then all at once as if someone had tugged a string. "Welcome to the building." On the landing, the blue bowl had been replaced with a green one. Maybe it had always been green. The water inside it had turned cloudy again, a soft film like ectoplasm thickening at the edges. A folded napkin underneath it had been replaced with a scrap of cloth, neatly hemmed. The child's chalk circles on 4C's door had sprouted a line like a tail. I told myself these were normal things in buildings where people lived, like potted plants or doormats that said "go away" in cheerful fonts. That evening, I taped my vents. It felt ridiculous until it didn't. The vents were in the bathroom and near the ceiling in the main room. Up close, the broad grates bore a fine fur of lint and a rime of grease, the exhale of other people's dinners and showers. I ran a damp paper towel across them, and my stomach rolled at what came away. My tape job looked like a craft project done with the wrong glue. A silver X over the bathroom vent, a hasty grid over the one in the main room. I cleaned because you can control a sink in a way you cannot control the sound of water in the walls. I organized the shelf with my books in a way that made the apartment feel like a place a person lived. Window, plant, a smooth stone my sister had brought me from the coast. I played a podcast too loudly for a while, then turned it down. I made tea and let the kettle whistle and felt old-fashioned, domestic, like I was pretending to be settled until it took. The knocks that night came at 12:13. Knock, knock, knock. I stood, set my mug in the sink, walked to the door, and pressed my eye to the peephole. The hallway bulged at me, its curve of sightline making objects seem closer than they were. The chalk circles had multiplied again. On 4C's threshold, I noticed generously sprinkled salt. It made me smile. I felt silly and a little fond of my anxious neighbor who salted her door like a steak. On the landing, the green bowl's cloud had settled to a ghostly lace. "Who is it?" I asked, because that's what you say if the world is normal. A soft, wet click like a tongue finding the right syllable. Then, Alex. My breath stopped. I hadn't told anyone my name out loud, except the goldfish-eyed man downstairs and the neighbors. The voice was mine again, a shade off, like a recording half a second too slow. "I'm in here," I said, my brain doing the absurd thing of wanting to reassure the person who was using my voice. "Who are you?" Silence then. "Me." The word slid under the door and cooled at my feet. "Open." I didn't. Something in me, something old, something that had kept my ancestors from stepping off cliffs or tasting bright berries, walked me backwards until my calves hit the futon. I sat, then stood again, leaving a ghost of heat on the cushion, and went, absurdly, to my tiny kitchen. I reached for the salt, but the container was new and the paper seal unbroken, and fumbling it made the moment comic when it wasn't. "Please," the voice said, quieter. I don't know how long I stood like that, like you do at a window with the phone in your hand when you think you've heard something outside and you're trying to decide what kind of person you are. The elevator cables thrummed. At a distance, I heard a washer start up, a rhythmic thump like a heartbeat. I didn't open the door. In the morning, slid under my door was a playing card, the 8 of Cups. Someone had drawn an eye in the center cup, in black pen, iris a dark starburst. On the back, in almost painfully neat handwriting, "Do not let it learn your name." This was not crazy person handwriting. It was teacher handwriting, looped and patient. The rational part of my mind, stubborn as a house cat, insisted that the superstition was theater, that the knocks were kids, that the voice was a trick. The part that had backed me into the futon touched the chalk residue on 4C's door with one finger and didn't wipe it on my jeans. I tucked the card into the frame of my mirror the way people tuck prayers into crevices of old stones. The days made a strange kind of sense. Sunlight, I found its slanted way into the apartment for 1 hour in the afternoon, and I made sure I was home for it, basking like a lizard in its flat warmth. I learned the building's habits. When someone boiled cabbage on the second floor, the smell climbed. When the fifth floor showered, my pipes sang 2 notes, E and then F, like a train going by a lonely crossing. Tycho began to nod at me in the hallway with less of the slow fish grin, which felt like friendship after a fashion. Flo on 4C accepted a bag of groceries one day without opening the door more than a few inches and passed me a book in return, a vintage thing about folk beliefs of the city. Her gray eye flashed in the chain's gap like a coin. I bought duct tape and salt and a small jar of mustard seeds because the book said mustard complicated evil, and not because I believed the book. You can prepare for a thing without believing in it. A person would be foolish to be certain. The nights did not improve. Knocks at precise, impolite times, 101, 222, 313. Always 3, never frantic. Always followed by a breath near the threshold that I felt in the hairs on my ankles. The breath had a temperature, but not a source. Shadow feet that faced away. My name in my voice. Once, I opened the peephole to a circus of fisheye distortions and saw, not the empty hallway, but my own eye looking back at me from the other side. It blinked when I blinked. The enlargement made it grotesque. For a long, sick moment, I thought the glass had somehow become a mirror. Then the other eye did a very small, very wrong thing. Lagged. I left the peephole covered with a square of cardboard after that, which made the knocks worse, because not knowing made everything larger. I started sleeping with the fan on for the noise, then sleeping on the couch for the illusion of being in a different room, then not sleeping at all, which made the apartment ripple at the edges like heat. One night, desperate for a different air, I went down to the basement for laundry at 11:47, breaking Flo's rule because the rule had started to feel like an invitation addressed to me. The basement was always a shade colder than the rest of the building. The concrete floor had a smoothness you get from years of feet choosing the same paths. The washers were industrial things with porthole windows. When they weren't running, they kept the smells of other people's soap like seashells keep the ocean. In the far corner, a door marked B9 was propped with a paint can. Beyond it, dark, an older tile, the hint of a room that had once been something else and was now storage or an idea of a room. A pale rectangle at the back might have been a mirror or the ghost of a window. The washers were full. Everyone in the building had apparently decided to break the same rule at once. I sat on the plastic chair and waited for a very long spin cycle, thinking for no good reason of the eye on the playing card. The cuff of my jeans was damp where I'd stepped in something near the utility sink. The drips from the pipes were too regular. They sounded like a word if you leaned into it. On the chalkboard above the folding table, someone had written, "Immutables." Under it, in different hand, 1. Do not believe the first voice you hear. 2. Do not speak your name to an empty hall. 3. Do not look for the source. It will find you if you want it. I was still smiling at this because the rules were so earnestly silly when the lights went out. When fluorescent lights go out like that, they don't go fully dark. They retain a blue after image of themselves like your lids do after you look at the sun. The hum stops. The hum stopping was worse than the dark. In the shape of that sudden quiet, something moved inside B9. A dry, flat movement like paper against paper. "Hey," I called before I could think of a better word. A pause. Then, "Hey!" The room said back in my voice. Copy flat, a fraction slower. That small, wrong lag. My voice seemed to come from the rectangle at the back of B9, where it might have once been a window onto the air shaft or a mirror arranged to bring light into the room. I could not tell which, and that not knowing felt like standing on the edge of a swimming pool you can't see the bottom of. My hand had already found the salt in my pocket. I had started carrying it without thinking, the way you carry a chapstick when your lips are cracked. I backed toward the door and shook the salt in an absent-minded trail like you do with breadcrumbs when you want to find your way. It looked foolish on concrete. The lights rasped and came back, stuttering like someone on the other side had shaken them awake. In B9, the pale rectangle was just a mirror without a frame, edges flaking like old pastry. My face, pale, sleep-lit, hung in it, and behind me the wink of stainless steel portholes. The mirror's surface buckled for a blink, like heat above a grill. A ripple ran toward me across the glass, a silvery worm, vague as a bad dream and then very real. I put my hand flat against the laundry room door. I had the stupid sense that if I turned my back to the mirror, I would lose. The salt found my fingers again and looped across the threshold in a quick, frantic fingers-width circle that would have been laughable to anyone who has ever believed in anything. The ripple arrived at the mirror's edge and pushed at the air like a cat pushes at a screen door. Tycho's goldfish eyes appeared at the top of the stairs. "You should not be here," he said calmly, as if telling me I had tracked mud on the rug. "Is it?" I swallowed. Several illicit words lined up to leap out, and I picked the smallest. "Is it real?" "Yes," he said, "and you have been feeding it." "What?" "You answer it," he said. "You put your ear to it. You give it shape. You call the air hello." I never. My throat betrayed me with the memory of the night I said, "Who is it?" and said my name, and coughed my hello into the dark gap under my door, like a coin into a needy hand. "You picked B9, Tycho said, in that infuriating way people do when you have to ask them to explain things they assume you already know. "Don't you know numbers?" He touched the chalkboard. Someone had wiped the immutables and written a new word, between. He underlined it. "This building used to be a tailor's," he said. They lined the inner shaft with mirror to pour light into the rooms. Light or its cousin. Mirrors faced mirrors. Things repeated. Once there were 3 more apartments. They bricked them, but the mirrors stayed. The shaft hungers. He smiled his slow smile, not unkind. Noise travels. The ripple on the mirror pushed hard enough now that the air puckered. The surface of the glass did something eyes could not stay on. It gave up being completely a surface for a tiny, treasonous part of a second. I could see through it, not into another room, but a thinner version of this one, a room drawn with a fine pen. The silver thing moving toward the threshold was shaped like a person's shadow stood upright. Its edges were wrong. They feathered away into something like smoke or static. It had the idea of shoulders, the suggestion of a head, and nothing inside it. "Salt," Tycho said. "I already." More. We salted. We salted like we were seasoning panic and wanted it to taste like anything but fear. We made a sloppy circle at the threshold and then, at Tycho's insistence, a figure 8 that crossed itself exactly over the steel plate in the floor where a dumbwaiter had once been. The thing reached the edge, touched a grain of salt with its rippled knot flesh, and recoiled with a sound like a match pinched out between wet fingers. "That's good," Tycho said, and then, conversationally, "It knows your shape. Don't let it know your name. Names open doors." He had none of his oddness in that moment. He was brisk, competent, painstaking. It almost made me angry to think that he had watched me walk around for days like an open window and not said anything strong enough to make me close. "Why didn't you?" I started, and then the super was at the bottom of the stairs too, keys clanking, a flashlight in his hand that looked like it had survived 3 blackouts and 2 wars. "What the hell?" Ketter said. Not a question, but an old habit. He saw the salt, saw the mirror doing its bad breathing, and he did not laugh. "Tycho," he said. "Back away." "You," he said to me, in the circle. I stepped into the sloppy figure 8 like a person being baptized. The air inside it felt ordinary. The air outside was thinner, as if something had sipped it hard and then let go. The mirror rippled again. The thing pushed, testing the edge like a dog tests a fence. Flo appeared behind Ketter, wrapped in a cardigan that had been a blanket in a previous life. Her gray eye was fierce and practical. In her hands, a spool of red thread as thick as her wrist. Heshla was behind her with a roll of duct tape and a box of mustard seed like she was about to lead a cooking class. "This is a lot," I said, and it came out like a laugh because my voice had decided laughter was business as usual. "Noise travels," Flo told me, as if I hadn't passed through the phrase a dozen times already but had finally arrived at understanding. "And it brings things." She set her hand on my shoulder and I felt, for a moment, something steady. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not stopping it before it learned you." "If you knew, we know it chooses," Ketter said. "It chooses the newest. It chooses the one who says hello with their mouth against the dark. We can't stop it choosing. We can only keep it from eating." If it eats one of us, we all go hungry. He winced at his own phrasing and looked like he wanted to tuck the words back in. You don't have to look at it. Don't look. I looked. Of course I looked. It was my voice on the glass. Alex, it said. Tycho flinched, hearing my name and my voice out of that thin, static mouth. Open. No, open, it said again, almost kindly. Please. It did not sound like me when I am crying. It did not know what my voice does when I remember my father's hands or when I burn popcorn. It only knew the shape of a hello. It pushed again, and a hairline crack feathered from the bottom corner of the mirror out like frost. Keter swore. Flo looped the red thread around my wrist with quick, neat pulls, and the other end around the handle of an unplugged dryer, and tied a sailor's knot that would have held a boat in a storm. If it pulls, she said, we pull back. If what pulls? I asked, and then the mirror answered. The thing did not come out like a ghost through a wall. That is too graceful a story. It came like a machete through paper from the other side. The world tore around it. The mirror screamed. Not a sound, but a sensation, like biting the tinfoil of your fillings. The figure lurched toward the threshold and found the salt. It recoiled again. It found the dumbwaiter plate and pressed itself over it like steam condensing on a cold lid, and I understood the stupid geometry of what they had drawn with the salt. A trapdoor. The wonder upstairs, the stupid little air shaft with its old mirrors, sang a terrible chord in my bones. It wants out, Tycho said softly. I think he was talking to himself. Everything wants out, Heschla said. That's not a reason. She reached past me and smeared mustard seeds along the line of the salt with her palm. For confusion. The thing, confused or not, put its not hand to the line again. A few grains of salt jumped, sparked, and fell. The line broke near the corner of the dumbwaiter plate. The thing pushed there immediately. It moved with the mindless efficiency of water seeking a drain. Patch it, Keter said, and Tycho threw himself to his knees and furiously salted what had broken. The thing turned its head toward him, curious. It put its knot face close to his face and breathed in as if to learn him. Tycho's eyes filled with saline like a goldfish's bowl refilled. He did not blink. He made the figure-8 hole with a shaking hand. Don't teach it, Flo said. Don't show it how. What do we do? I heard myself ask, and my voice, ordinary and small in that room, sounded like an offering. We can't. There's a way, Heschla said. There's always been a way. Someone wrote it up once, before my time. You ride it up to a floor that isn't there, and you leave it there. She looked at Keter. Can the elevator still do it? Keter glanced toward the corridor where the elevator waited in its iron grate, patient as a horse made of old metal. He weighed something, and it felt like he put me on one side of a scale and the building on the other and hated that he had to. He nodded once. 13, he said. The buttons say 12 and then 14, but she knows. Who's she? I asked, as if femaleness were an additional horror genre I had not prepared for. The box, Keter said gently, and my head filled with the image of the elevator, regarding me with its old brass plate and its tired eyes. We have to get it inside with you. You stand in the center. Don't touch the mirrors. Don't say your name. The door will try to open at every floor. It will try to coax. It will show you things. He put the flashlight in my hand and closed my fingers over it, abruptly fatherly. Do not get out until the doors open on nothing. The void will feel like a draft in the teeth. When you feel that, throw the salt, all of it. Make a ring. Step out. Don't look back. I'm not. Courage is a funny thing. Some part of you says quietly, I am not brave, and the other parts stand around with their hands in their pockets pretending they don't hear. Why me? Because it knows your outline, Tycho said softly, and you know it's. You could do it, I said to him. You know the rules. He smiled then, properly, the way a person does when you know them a little, and they like you a little, despite themselves. I shake, he said. It would read my fear like a menu. Flo touched my cheek with 2 dry fingers. She had a grandmother's permission, without the blood that makes it automatic. It's worse if we let it stay. It eats into the walls. We'll hold the door. We'll keep your thread. My throat had become a locked door with the key on the wrong side. I nodded because there was nothing else to do that wasn't more horrifying. Heschla looped the red thread twice around my wrist. Tycho pressed the half-empty salt container into my palm and kissed my temple, quickly and without hope, the way a person kisses a photo before leaving it on a shelf. Keter held the elevator door and said, "Noise travels, kid. Let's send some back." The elevator had mirrors on 3 sides. I had not noticed them before, because they were so dull they were nearly metal. In them, I was 3 pale people with a thread on my wrist, and behind me 3 Tychos and 3 Heshlas and 3 Flos. The doors closed with a sound like a cough that had finally found its throat. At floor 3, the doors opened of their own accord, even though no one had pressed the button. The hall was dim and exactly like the one in my building, except that the paint was a shade too blue and the doors were a shade too short. A child in a white dress stood at 3C, drawing circles on the wood with chalk. She turned to look at me with a face that could have been anyone's, and her mouth opened like a coin slot. "Alex," she said in my voice. "Open." I hit the closed door button with my knuckles like a person pushing a friend underwater to save them from a bullet. My heart was a wild rabbit in a small cage. At floor 5, the doors slid again. The hallway was full of bowls, blue, green, yellow, arranged in a pattern that made my stomach crawl. Water sloshed in them even though they had not been touched. In the mirrors, the water sloshed the other way. I kept my eyes on the brass where the floor numbers ticked up. I did not let the Alex that breathed against my ear become a person. I did not answer. At every floor it tried. Voices from behind the elevator's dull mirrors that were my father's and my mother's and mine, my sister's from 2 cities ago, my own voice laughing at a joke I hadn't told yet. The elevator did not slow when it should have. It slid past floors like a hand slipping past beads on a string. At 12, the car paused as if deciding. The brass plate's numbers stopped glowing in sequence, and all lit at once. The box shivered. I felt the draft in my teeth, cold and clean like winter coming through a crack you cannot find. The doors opened to nothing. That's not true. They opened to a hallway exactly like mine that had been erased with the back of a hand. Color had been taken out of it, pulled like a thread from a sweater. It was a blueprint of a hallway, lines and suggestions. The air had a taste. All the bowls that had ever been on all the landings made a soft water sound, as if the building breathed them and breathed them out. The mirrors in the elevator swam. The figure that had pushed through the basement mirror was here now, not confined by glass, the idea of a body learning fast. It leaned its head into the threshold and tasted the air like a deer at a salt lick. I stepped out because I had to. The thread tightened on my wrist, then relaxed as flow, anchor solid, let me go a little, and then pulled me back a fraction, hand on the rope. I took 3 steps and flung the salt in a circle the way you throw a drink at someone you wanted to love. The grains fell in a bright, stupid ring. The thing flinched. It put its knot hand against the salt and burned a little, its edge seared away for a heartbeat in a curl of shimmer. Behind me, from the elevator, my voice said my name like a prayer. It did it so well. Every syllable, every shape of breath. It had learned. I held the rest of the salt to my chest like a baby and forced myself not to look back, because Keter had told me that part as if it mattered more than anything. Flo pulled the thread. I stepped back. The thing surged, wanting the warmth of the shape I left in the air. The ring held. I got my foot into the elevator. The thing moved toward the door fast, and I grabbed the edge of the salt ring with the toe of my shoe, smearing it too wide on one side and too thin on the other, and it found that immediately, because of course it did. It had always been a good student. It lunged. The elevator doors closed like a bite. The car fell and rose at once, which is how fear feels. The box shuddered like a heart told a horrible secret too fast. The red thread snapped taut and then slack again. On the way down, the elevator's mirrors were honest for once. They showed me pale and alive and not brave. Salt on my jeans, and salt under my nails, and salt stuck to my lips where I must have licked them in a habit I had not noticed before. At B, the doors opened on Keter's keys and Flo's hands and Tycho's eyes too watery to be useful. I fell into them. Someone was crying, and it might have been me. Someone said it's okay. It's okay in a tone that has never made anything okay. Heshla put both hands on my face like she was shaping clay and pronounced me unbroken. "It will be hungry," she said, not unkindly, "and thin for a while. It will try new knocks." "How long until?" I didn't know how to finish the sentence without sounding like a person asking after weather. Until it learns someone else? Tycho said. Don't say it like that. That's what it does, I said. That's what I did for it. You didn't choose it, Flo said. I chose hello, I said, and the way silence fell at that felt liturgical. They brought me upstairs as if I had been sick. The hallway smelled like salt and old lemons. At 4B, the playing card had slid down from the mirror frame to the sink as if someone had exhaled on it. The Eight of Cups eye stared at me with its pen iris and seemed stupidly to approve. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to sleep for a week. Salt your threshold, Heschla said, as if suddenly we were back to ordinary tasks. Tape your vents. You know the drill. I don't want to live here, I said. It came out quietly, the way you say I don't want to be this person anymore, as if a landlord will come and say you don't have to. Most of us don't, Tycho said. He said it without self-pity. But moving won't help you if you don't learn not to feed it. It'll find you in the black corners of any house. It's not about the address. Do not look for it, Flo said. You looked enough. Don't give it the lesson again. They left me with salt in a pretty jam jar, as if that would make it more acceptable to my eye. The red thread still circled my wrist. I washed my face and fell asleep on the futon with the fan on because I needed noise to stand between me and anything. What followed was not a movie's ending. The knocks did not stop, but they changed. They came at 4:44 for a while, silly and menacing in equal measure. When I didn't answer, they waited for 2:17 and tried again, as if the thing inside the thin place had made a list of human times. It spoke less like me and more like a version of me that had learned language from books about me, a stilted echo. I learned not to lean my ear to the door. I learned not to open the peephole. I learned how to sleep like an animal, one ear on, one foot ready. My neighbors weren't kind exactly, but they were something that might be better. They were watchful. They brought me bowls, yellow this time, and showed me where to set them on the landing. It likes to drink, Tycho said, and when I started laughing at this because I had to, he added, don't ask from where. Flo slipped notes under my door sometimes, little triumphs, caught it in the stair between 2 and 3. Slower tonight. Her handwriting was clear enough to steady a person. Heschla left me a jar of honey without a note, and weeks later, when we stood together on the landing listening to a neighbor's radio crackle with static, like the sound of a dress pulled over a head, she said offhand, I'm glad you didn't die, as if she was commenting on weather. When new people came, I found myself at my door, watching through the peephole I told myself I wouldn't use. I cut a rectangle in the cardboard so I could look without looking. I slipped notes under their thresholds. One line, neat as a teacher's, do not answer the door after midnight. Do not say your name into nothing. People snorted. People salted. People did both. 3 months later, a couple moved into 4A who laughed a lot and stacked boxes like a game. They were in love the way an apartment is in love with its own wire. Bright, humming, a little dangerous. The first night, I heard them giggling by their door, whispering into the peephole as if it was a telephone. I pressed my head to the wall because I wanted to bang it and didn't. I slid a playing card under their door in the morning, the 8 of Cups, hand-drawn eye. But when I came home that afternoon, it had been taped to the elevator's mirror like art. They thought it was an aesthetic. At 12:13 that night, I heard knock, 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 polite as a neighbor. Across the hall, the couple laughed. Who is it? One of them said, sweet and theatrical. And when the voice on the other side answered in her voice, when she gasped, delighted and scared, I was already at my door with the salt in my hand and the thread on my wrist. I do not know if you can live in a place like this and not become what someone else would call creepy. I pressed my eye to the peephole sliver I'd left for myself and saw shadow feet turned the wrong way, a world thin as paper, and behind those feet the suggestion of a hallway erased. I slid the note. I knocked once, sharp, human. Don't, I said, soft through the wood. Don't feed it. There was a silence on the other side that might have been 2 people looking at each other. The thing at the door tasted the quiet and leaned in. It whispered the girl's name with the peculiar intimacy of a recording made in your empty apartment when you are gone. It is not the ending. That is the problem with true things. It is a practice. We keep the bowls filled. We tape our vents. We salt our thresholds. We do not answer the first hello. We bring red thread down to the laundry room like we're going to mend something, and sometimes we do. When the knocks come, I let the fan make its white waterfall, and I lie on my back, staring at the ceiling stain that looks like a continent or a bruise. I breathe with the building. I make myself heavy in my body and imagine the shape of my name, its angles and its soft corners, folding into a drawer where it is safe. I imagine the elevator's numbers lighting all at once, the doors opening onto nothing, the gust of cold air on my teeth. I imagine a version of me stepping forward into the thin place with a jar of salt and knees that don't shake. Sometimes late, when the building has finally decided to stop speaking and just hum, I stand at the window that isn't and look down into the airshaft's square of forgotten sky. You can see the old mirrors if you catch the angle. They throw back a little of your face even in the dark. They throw back a little of everything. Somewhere down there, water drips into a bowl, and the sound travels up through the bones of the building like a message. Hello, it says, over and over, because that's the only word it knows. I do not say it back. I told myself it was only for the photographs. I had a paying client, an online magazine that ran a series called After Hours. They specialized in empty places, department stores closed at midnight, libraries with the lights out, museums with guards leaning on mop handles beside sleeping paintings. Give us a mood, my editor had said. Give us mystery, motion in stillness. When he mentioned the old amusement park at the edge of the bay, the one fenced off for a decade and a half, rumored to be sinking into its own foundations, I said yes before the map even finished loading on my phone. It took 2 trains and a long walk along a crescent of cracked asphalt that smelled like tidal rot and machine grease. The last of the commuter buses were coughing past when the park's jagged skyline rose from the darkness. A Ferris wheel punched out against the sky like a broken gear, the skeletal lift hill of a roller coaster, the peaked roof of a carousel pavilion with its shingles scalloped like scales. A chain-link fence surrounded everything, decked with signs whose white had gone to tea brown. No trespassing, property of the city, danger, structure unsound. The padlock on the service gate looked newer than the rest. I shined my headlamp through the diamond of wire mesh just to see whether it deserved the legends. A drift of fog was crossing the midway, nearly luminescent in the moonlight. Torn streamers like flensed skin hung from the trellises, and at the far end of the promenade a row of game booths squinted with striped awnings that had faded from red and white to the color of old meat and nicotine teeth. Even from the fence I could smell sweetness turned rancid, spun sugar, syrup, popcorn butter, only now their ghosts smelled like mold and fish scales. I wasn't scared. Not then. Not exactly. I had the confidence of having decided something hours ago with a bright screen and coffee in my hand. I had a reason, a contract. In my backpack, a folded release letter from the city's parks office that said, in the bare vowels of municipal bureaucracy, that I was allowed access for the sake of art, and there would be no liability should I trip on a nail and fall through a rotted board into whatever waited beneath. The fence sagged away from its posts along the far side, down by the employee lot. The lock on the service gate did its best, but the bottom rung of chain link had been peeled up like a fish's belly and curled back. People had been here before me. I told myself they'd been kids looking for a dare. I tied back the fence with a strap, flattened myself, and slid under. My jacket caught for a breath against an unseen barb, and when I stood on the inside, my spine remembered it too long, the sensation of almost not making it, the quick caress of the mesh. Inside, the quiet was different. The boundary of the fence had kept out much of the city's noise. What remained felt curated, collected, and placed. The click of a distant buoy, the soft halyards of a sailboat tapping metal, the wing tremolo of some insect I didn't know. The park's bones made their own threadbare song. Ropes creaked. A sign squeaked in a hinge somewhere. Something small knocked a bottle that rolled, and then came to a balanced stop. I was aware of my breathing in a way I hadn't been outside. I kept moving because stillness would have let the place collect in me. I passed a ticket booth with cracked glass and a sign that listed prices no one had paid in years. All-day wristband, $19.99. Single ride, $2.50. Night ticket, $5 after 8 p.m. My light swept the counter. Something had been spilled there once, and the stain was still a darker island, sticky even now with humidity. A cluster of paper wristbands sagged from a hook like dead minnows. Luna Park, the old map on the wall said in curling script. But not the Luna Parks of history books. This one had a local name too, stenciled in block letters beneath, Lark's Way. A cartoon bird wearing a vest and a bow tie smiled beside the map, one wing pointing toward the attractions. The Lark, roller coaster, carousel of delights, mirror maze, the grinning grotto, haunted boat ride, soda fountain, midway. The bird's beak had been drawn with thick black lines, and some bored child had once drawn teeth inside it with a ballpoint pen. It would be fine, I told myself. I would set my camera on the ticket counter and take a long exposure, let the moon write its way across the sky. The editor wanted motion in stillness. They would love the Ferris wheel, a skeletal planet streaking with the clouds. Then I would walk across the midway and photograph the carousel pavilion. I'd make it a study in rot and remnant, the glory that sticks to things like sugar on fingers after the candy is gone. I placed my tripod on the counter and extended the legs, careful with the uneven floor. I took the first shot, 30 seconds, f8, ISO 200. The red indicator flashed. The quiet was good, the kind of quiet that lets you hear if a shot goes wrong. It completed with a soft click. I glanced at the screen. The photo was good enough to keep me here. A spill of fog, the booth's trapezoid eye, the distant wheel, the mood before a word. I breathed easier. Then, from somewhere deep in the park, a single two-note melody. It was a Calliope phrase, the simplest little dip and rise, as if the old organ had cleared its throat. 2 notes, distant as a memory, played underwater. My rational mind lifted its hand. Wind, it said, through pipes somewhere. Or some teenager with a Bluetooth speaker and a taste for practical jokes. I took another exposure to deny the idea the attention it wanted. The second photograph was good too, but when I looked closely, I thought I saw a smear in it. A darker shape that wasn't fog and wasn't my shadow. A vertical smudge beside the carousel pavilion door, as if someone had stood there and shifted their weight during the exposure. A trick of light. An artifact. I told myself I'd tripod slap or the breeze had nudged the lens hood. My headlamp's battery indicator winked yellow. I switched it off to save it and pulled my lantern from my pack, a collapsible LED that threw a squat cylinder of warmth. It made the ticket booth look almost domestic, a kitchen island under renovation. I put the lantern on the counter and set the timer for a long exposure to let the scene soak it in. The air smelled like wet horse and candy and rust. Another sound came. This time not musical, but a soft flute, like the pages of a book fanned slowly. It came from the direction of the carousel pavilion. It was the banners, I told myself. The fog in there moved differently, a tide that ran a little faster than the one on the midway. I waited. The sound stopped the instant I noticed it. And then the carousel gave a tiny movement, no more than a clock hand changing its mind. In my lantern light, the pavilion's shadow on the ground changed shape, as if the world's light source were not the moon after all, but something inside the building itself. When the exposure finished, I slipped the camera into my pack and lifted the lantern. It felt heavier than it had before, as if gravity ran in rivulets here instead of sheets. I hopped the turnstile because it was the thing to do. The rubber surface of it had powdered to smoke beneath my hand, and the powder clung to my skin like old newsprint. The carousel pavilion's doors had been boarded over long ago, but one of the planks sagged at a bottom corner, making a wedge wide enough for a lantern and a person with their shoulders turned. I eased through sideways, and the pavilion let my breath fog it. The smell inside was loam and leather, and a faint sweetness that lived in my sinuses like a memory of being 5. My lantern's light hit the round of the ride like a hand on a shoulder. The horses stood frozen in their orbits, manes thrown in unseen wind, their mouths open in delight so perfect it looked like pain. One horse near me had lost an eye. In the socket some creature had built a nest out of ticket stubs. The poles ran up from their backs into a ceiling painted with nymphs who had gone the color of tea. The mirrors between the horses were the only things still bright. I moved my lantern and saw myself move in a dozen frames, A man with a small light and a larger shadow, and for an instant in one mirror I saw the lantern sway after I had stopped moving, as if a second hand had steadied it for me. "Motion in stillness," I whispered, because saying my job out loud felt like a hedge against being in a place for no good reason at all. A sound like a coin dropping came from the darkness beyond the carousel, the quick silver tick of it finding wood, then rolling into a corner. I swung the lantern. The light showed a prize booth, with its glass front cracked to syrup. The stuffed animals within were furred with dust, their plastic eyes bright. A ring toss game nearby still had 3 rings on pegs, each labeled with a prize tier. The rings glowed slightly, soaked with moon. I approached, because that's what my body always did with small mysteries. In the prize booth, on the counter beneath the glass, lay a gleam of brass, an old-fashioned token about the size of a quarter. "Night ticket," it read in a ring of letters. In the center, embossed, was the lark, the park's mascot, wearing that bow tie, its painted eye looking slightly off the center of the world. I didn't pick it up. I put my hand unthinkingly against the glass instead, the way you put a hand against a cat that will take it or turn away. The glass was cold in a particular way, colder than air. It seemed to want heat. A smear bloomed beneath my fingers like breath on a mirror. It stayed when I lifted my hand. It was too quiet in there. I got the shot, I told myself. Now get out. The carousel's platform shifted again, a whisper of circle, as if its first instinct after darkness was to remember its path. I backed toward the doors. My lantern's reflection in the mirrors got smaller the closer I came to leaving. I slid through the wedge and my jacket caught again and didn't let go this time. For a second I was anchored, and then the fabric tore, and I stumbled into the midway with a noise that sounded like a stage cue, like a cue for something else to begin. The 2-note melody came again from farther away, picked out in air, a child's song calling to be finished. I thought, wind. And then I thought, someone has to be in here with me. "Hello?" I called, because the word has carried more people out of their own bad decisions than it has lured to their deaths. My voice went up and lost its edges in the fog. No one answered. I set the lantern on the ground and dug out my handheld recorder. It was an old thing with scratches that had their own stories. It had a habit of capturing the stuff my camera didn't. I pressed record and said, "Luna Park, Lark's Way, 11:43 p.m. Carousel just shifted. Heard a coin drop. Heard an organ? Maybe." My voice sounded steady enough that I could pretend my hand wasn't shaking. I thought then of the mirror maze. It would be good for a shot. It would have the geometry the editor liked. It was on the map just past the carousel. The letters on its trapezoidal entrance had been peeled away by sun and rain until they read IR Rays. The plywood door was ajar, caught on a roller skate stuck beneath it. The air inside smelled like silver polish and mildew and colder again. The maze's lights were long dead, but whoever had built it had made a ceiling of translucent plastic panels, and the moon was determined enough to invade anywhere glass permitted. The effect was like being inside the iris of a giant and seeing your own pupil multiplied. I lifted the recorder. Entering mirror maze. Saying it was a way to stop the last argument against doing it. Mirrors stuttered my lantern into an army. There was an initial relief in seeing yourself 100 times. It told the lizard brain that there were many of you after all, that you might not be alone. But the relief curdled quickly. Each reflection was a hair off in timing or angle. My shoulders looked narrower in one, my mouth a degree more hesitant in another. The floor was poured concrete that had settled wrong and then been patched. My footsteps made a hollow, dull sound that returned with the rhythm off by a fraction, like a song heard from another apartment down the hall. Left, right, right. The maze remembered the kind of thinking this required. My body followed its old childhood habits. My lantern touched a scuff on the mirror's surface, where someone had traced a finger through dust to write a message. "Don't smile back." "Cute," I said to hear myself. Halfway in, the maze tightened. The mirrors were newer here, or else the painter had sealed them better from air. The reflections stopped yellowing. I breathed and fog bloomed on glass in a dozen near faces, and a second slower breath followed that wasn't mine. I lifted the recorder. "Hearing breathing," I said, but the word hearing sounded like claiming too much. I set the recorder on a protruding corner and took a long exposure, 15 seconds, just to let the place right itself on the screen. I turned away from the camera for the shot, because a voice in my head said if anything came toward my reflection, I should see it with my human eyes, not my lens. The breathing settled into the rhythm of mine, as if by imitation. The air grew colder, chin cold, throat cold, and when I lifted my lantern to leave a smear of light, my reflection lifted it too, and one of the other reflections, 2 planes down, did not. In that one, the lantern stayed at waist level. My reflection's face was lit from below, and the eyes were darker than the rest by a degree that made them feel not mine at all. Something tapped beside me, a polite, delicate tap-tap, like a fingernail on glass. I turned my head without moving my body, as a child does when they pretend to keep playing. The mirror at my right shoulder had a crack that ran like lightning from top to bottom. The crack had widened slightly. It was living the tiny violence of its own repair. "Okay," I whispered, "the sound you make to a dog that has started at nothing." I bent and took my recorder and the camera, and I made a quick wrong turn because the maze knew that now was the time to spring its one trick. My lamp met a dead end with my face in it, and the nose in the reflection was not like mine. Its bridge had been broken once and had healed crooked. It took my mind 3 heartbeats to process that as absurd. When I moved to the left, my reflection's left moved as expected, but the crooked nose never corrected itself. It was simply there. I stood there a second too long, as if meeting someone you know you'll have to introduce yourself to in a version of your life you hadn't planned. Behind me, softly at first, the 2-note melody again, and then 2 more notes that made a small question and 2 more that answered, an infantile motif. It was being played more confidently now. "Someone there?" I asked. The answer came in the dry whisper of a costume moving against itself. I know that sound. As a kid, I had hugged a mascot once, and the plush fibers whispered in my ear and promised safety. This whisper was a cousin of that, if that cousin hadn't slept right in years. A shape moved in the corner of my eye. It was reflected and reflected, so I couldn't say where it actually was. It looked like the lark, vest, bow tie, oversized beak, a period and exclamation point combined. It lifted a wing and pointed into the glass labyrinth at a single square mirror where my reflection had not returned my lifted arm. I raised my hand higher, and the reflection stayed motionless, a half beat too long, the delay a film of oil on a pool of time. "Okay," I said again, but this time it sounded like permission given to a stranger inside my mouth. I turned and found the path by touch, palm to mirror, fingertip to cold, letting the sound of my own breath pull me like a rope. I came out of the IR rays feeling stamped. I looked at my hand, and there it was, ink where there had been none. It wasn't fresh, no gleam to it, but a faint old stamp had resurrected, "Admit 1." Beneath it, in tiny type, "Night." The park had stamped me without touching me. Something had authorized my presence. The thought lifted the hairs on my arms in a clean sweep. I wanted distance. The Ferris wheel was the tallest thing. High places make me feel rational. I crossed the midway quickly, my lantern's light making a soft tunnel. At the wheel's base, the operator's booth was on stilts. Its round window still had a fringe of novelty lights asleep behind grime. The ladder to the booth creaked in friendly ways. I climbed and opened the door, and the smell inside was wood and dust and a deeper mineral damp that made me think of caves. Control levers still stood in their slots like stubborn weeds. The big master switch was in the off position with a little metal tag through it, as if someone had married it to itself forever. Through the booth window, above the fog, the bay's surface shone like tinfoil. The coaster's lift hill stabbed at the moon and missed by inches. The carnival stretched in half-warm half-life around me. The Calliope phrase came again, and this time I could make out a second voice. A rhythmic undersound like bellows or lungs, pushing air from a place that had no business breathing. I realized then, with the small chagrin of solving a puzzle too late to be proud, that there was no wind. The flags hung limp, the fog was lazy on the ground, the banners inside the carousel had only fanned because I had seen them fan in my head. Yet the wheel made a noise like a machine easing itself awake so it wouldn't startle its own joints. I left the booth and climbed higher, up onto the wheel itself, using the maintenance ladders bolted to the central arm. Each rung was chalked with salt from the bay, and my hands came away tasting like coins. At the first service platform, the whole park was a model. I put the lantern down and turned it down to a low throb. The metal warmed beneath my thighs. Something shifted in the seat directly below me. A car that had been locked at an angle gave a tiny conceding lurch, as if a new weight had nested there. The whisper of costume fur on costume fur edged the air. I didn't look down. I watched the distant funhouse instead, the sign for the grinning grotto lit by nothing at all. Its painted mouths were too many. I breathed, and the wheel's spokes made a pattern I hadn't seen, a web of triangles and rhombi that felt not designed but grown. "Okay," I said. Okay. Because here was the rule, and it came from nowhere and everywhere. Do not look directly at the thing that wants you to name it. Name something in an amusement park and it puts on a suit with your size pinned to it. "Lark," I said instead, using the mascot's name. I don't know why. It came out like reproach and plea. "If you're up here, I can't." The wheel hummed beneath me. The master switch was off, but something hummed anyway, the way your jaw hums when you clench it. I climbed down. At the bottom, I went to the operator's booth again and put both hands on the console. The covered banks of indicator lights looked like eyelids that would open at the touch. I told myself I'd pull every breaker and then find the main panel for the entire park and cut it, and then I'd stand at the fence until dawn and deliver whatever photographs I'd managed to save and never return. My reflection in the booth glass looked wrong again. Not wrong like in the mirror maze. Wrong like edited by something that didn't know human errors, only the idea of error in general. For a heartbeat, my head seemed too large, a lens distortion that corrected itself when I blinked, and when it corrected something in the background of the reflection remained large. A shape in the doorway behind me that had the broad shoulders of a person in a suit whose head was an exaggerated version of a bird's. I turned and the doorway was empty, except for fog script. I closed the booth door and leaned into it because people lean into doors in stories and sometimes the stories are right. The hum stopped when the door clicked. I stood there breathing like a fish. In the silence, I could hear the tape in my recorder turning. I hadn't touched it. It had turned itself on, and it was playing back not my voice, but a voice with a microphone's rasp on it, archival, the way old vinyl puts a layer of snow on a voice. "Welcome, one and all, to the night," the voice said. "Night ticket on the back of your hand? There it is. That's consent. That's all we ever needed. Line up to the left for the first ride. Keep your hands inside the car at all times. Do not feed the lark." I picked up the recorder with 2 fingers like it was an egg found on concrete. The little screen showed nothing I could use. A time code frozen at 00. I slid it into my pocket. I slid the camera in after it. My body had learned something. It had learned to cluster all moving pieces where I could put a hand on them if I had to run. I heard the coaster before I saw it. Not its chain, they had cut that, but the whisper of its track as something with the weight of steel wheels rolled slowly along it, using a motive force that was not peripheral but central. The station came into view like a mouth. A car was nestled there, black as the inside of a closed eye. The gate that would have separated the queue from the platform had been unlocked and left to sag. The car's lap bar was up. The seat's vinyl had cracked into continents. The sign above the station showed the bird again, beak open in a laugh. "The lark," it said in a font that made my teeth ache. Someone had crossed the T so hard it gouged down the sign's face. The graffito looked old. In chalk on the platform floor, someone had written a list that I recognized instantly, not as rules but as instructions for surviving a night. Don't ride alone. Don't look up when you hear your name. If you have to choose, go right. Keep moving. Do not. 4th line broken. There were darker stains on the platform. I told myself they were oil. The Calliope played again right behind my left ear. 2 notes that became 3, a childish insistence on building. I stepped back from the platform and my heel met nothing, the kind of nothing that eats your weight. I pinwheeled and my butt hit concrete hard enough that electricity went through my teeth. My lantern toppled, rolled, and came to rest with its light aiming under the platform into a crawl space I wouldn't have stuck my arm into for money. The light pooled there and gave me a view of the underbelly of the park. Beams, cross-beams, rope-like veins, wires that looked like vines, vines that looked like wires. Something pulsed slowly deep within. At each pulse, the Calliope gave a quick, ghosted cough. The lap bar of the coaster came down with a thunk. No one had touched it. It lay there like an invitation. Not a ride, I told the empty air, because putting truth on a sentence can sometimes stabilize it. I'm not. Behind me, a plush whisper, a step, a presence the size of two men in a suit of friendly bird. My head did not want to turn. My body turned anyway. And there it was, the lark, down the length of the station, its head tilted with the interest an animal gives something new. The suit had the wrong kind of dirt on it, the expensive dirt of a long archive. The bow tie was a high, cheerful stripe. The eyes were painted black with a shine that had not dulled. Where the beak parted there was cloth, but behind the cloth there was something moving slower than breath. It lifted one wing and pointed at the stamp on my hand. The stamp on my hand had darkened, as if something inside my body had sent blood out to greet it. Admit one, it read. No, I said, as if there were a scale, and my voice could tip it. No, it stepped closer. When it moved, the air carried a faint scent of cheap perfume, vanilla with a fake lemon's bite, that had long ago soaked into the costume's foam and lived there now like a ghost. I did the one thing that felt like offense. I raised my camera. Flash, I thought. Flash, the thing that wanted night. My finger found the button. The light went off with a chalk-white crack. The bird had stood in a posture of friendliness, but when the flash caught it, the friendliness got lost. What remained in that light was the flat of the mask, and within the mask were seams where someone had once stitched human to symbol. Behind the mesh of the mouth, I saw not teeth, but threads attached to a darker surface that shivered. The flash left a white hunger across my vision that made the bird into a hole. The Calliope played a whole run for the first time, a child finishing the line they've been practicing. And beneath it came the steady push of air from beneath the platform, the slow pump. I ran. There isn't elegance to it. I ran exactly the way an animal runs. The lap bar of the coaster lifted as I passed, trying to make a case. I didn't listen. My shoes found the midway again, and I aimed for the exit, the gap in the fence where my strap still held the curl back. The park was bigger now. The midway wouldn't resolve into the fence. It made loops like a rider's kneecap. The game booths repeated, only slightly wrong. In this one the bottles were green. In the next they were brown. In a third they were a color I could not have named in daylight. The prize booth's glass had a smear where my hand had been. Now there were two smears. The horses in the carousel all had both eyes back. Okay, I said, because that word can be turned to any use. Okay, I hear you. I ducked behind the funnel cake stand and found the back-of-house path that workers once used, wide enough for a golf cart. I ran it because it was straight, and on straight things, you can look at the point where you'll be and put your body down like a ruler to reach it. The path bent right, and a white-painted hand on a post pointed left. I went left anyway, because the chalk's instruction list had said right if you had to choose, and I am wrong even when I'm trying to be right. The path opened on a flat with an electrical shed squatting like a man who hadn't decided whether to stand up. The door was metal. A padlock hung from it. The lock's belly was open where someone had done something to it. A heart of springs showed. The door itself was warped. I put my foot on the rust-thinned corner and kicked down. The metal buckled in a way that told me I had not been the first to try it. I got it open enough to get inside. The panel was a station of switches and levers with labels like wisdom teeth. Main, submain, Calliope, wheel, grotto, maze. All were down. All were off. The hum in the building did not come from the panel. It came from beneath my feet. There were slats in the concrete floor that made a shallow crawl space. The slats had been pried up by someone in one corner and not replaced. I crouched and held my lantern over the gap. The beam found the black mouth of a pipe, big enough around for a bull to suffocate in. Its rim was flanged. The bolts were smeared with something waterproof that sublimed in the light. If the Calliope needed air and the electrical panel was off and the carousel turned when I wasn't looking, then this was the source. Air rose from it in slow, rhythmic exhalations, warm, with the smell of iron and sea and something that does not deserve the name sweet, but will not allow any other. I flinched back, hit the panel, and a metal toggle snapped off in my hand like a tooth. Something moved behind me, big enough that my body knew it before my eyes. I turned, and the lark filled the doorway to the shed, shoulders framed in metal, head ducked by an inch. It had walked there without sound, and in the small space its height made me feel the inside of my own size. It raised a wing again, but now the wing did not point at my hand. It pointed at the open slats in the floor. "No," I said, and my voice was a child's again. "No." It tilted its head. Behind the mesh of the mouth something worked. A whisper came out, or a breath that wanted to be a whisper. "Night," it said, or the shape of that word made in the absence of voice. "I don't want your ticket," I told it. "I don't want—" Another voice came then, not from the lark but from the fog just to its left, hollow, cracked, learned from a microphone long ago. "Caretaker," the voice said, the syllables separated with surgical neatness. "Shift relates to darkness, light goes with day. We larks look after night." The bird, no. The suit, no. The thing with a person once inside, took a half step into the shed. The panel behind me rattled where my shoulder pressed it. The shed's dry air had taken on dampness. The damp had a body. "What happened to the last caretaker?" I asked, because questions can sometimes be ropes. "Why me?" The lark's head tilted the other way and the movement had grace. It touched the rim of the stamp on my hand with the tip of two plush fingers. The pressure was careful, almost paternal. "The night," the stamp said. "Admit one." The ink warmed where it touched, and then chilled, and then warmed again with the rhythm of the air from the pipe. In the carousel's mirror I had seen a version of me whose nose had been broken once. I remembered then, not entirely voluntarily, a memory I'd given up. The summer I was 9, and my uncle had taken me to this park after my father left. I had not remembered it because that summer had been an archive of non-events, and I had left most of it in boxes. But one day we came here, and my uncle bought me a night ticket so we could stay after dark. The stamp on my hand had been the exact same shape. He had told me not to ride the lark if I could help it, because mountains are for daylight. He had gone to get us waters, and he hadn't come back, and my aunt had spoken of him forever after, as if he worked nights in another country. "Caretaker," the voice in the fog said again gently, and now the calliope took up the word and put a ribbon of tune through it. "No," I said. And before my body could ask permission, I put the lens of my lantern against the stamp on my hand. It burned in the way hot water burns, and the ink shone. I pressed until the smell of my own skin singing filled the shed. The stamp blurred beneath the heat, and then steadied, and then blotted, and then, with a small obscene satisfaction, bubbled. I pulled the lantern away. The stamp looked as if I had tried to take a tattoo off with a razor, and thought better of it halfway. The lark recoiled an inch. The whisper behind the mesh stuttered and caught. Its wing fell. The presence in the doorway paused, a statue that had been a man that had been a bird. The pipe below us breathed again, but for the first time it inhaled, not exhaled, and my ear popped like a plane landing. The calliope's phrase broke off in the middle of the question. I kicked the slats back over the pipe with the heel of my shoe and knocked the lantern over in the process. The lantern rolled toward the lark and struck its leg. The fabric dented and sprang back. I lunged after the lantern, for light, for weapon, and the lark lifted its plush foot and brought it down on the lantern with a sound like a soft hammer cracking glass. Darkness inhaled the room. A shard of glow remained. My camera's standby light pulsing red like a heart under a sheet. I reached for the door of the shed where the darkness wasn't as absolute and ran past the lark in a close way that made contact with the world of plush and zipper. My shoulder hit the beak. It yielded like rubber with something harder beneath. Behind me, the lark turned without turning its feet. Its head swiveled, then its shoulders remembered to follow. The fog outside had thickened into stairs of different heights. I took them wrong-footed, and my ankle rolled and then corrected. And then I was back on the back of house path, and then the midway, and then the exit gate at last. The chain link lifted where my strap still held it back like a mouth with a spoon keeping it open. I dropped to my stomach and slid under. The mesh caught my backpack this time, and I left it there with the recorder, the camera, the spare batteries, my municipal letter. There was a moment of letting go as clean as anything I've done, like cutting hair off the back of my head with your eyes closed and trusting the scissors. The top of the fence grazed my spine and I was out. Night air without sugar smell. Night air without machine iron in it. Night air with the ordinary ocean's salt and rustful breeze. I stood. I didn't look back. You look back and you give the world a reflection to work with. I walked. I ran the last 50 yards because the mind wants one sprint to make a story. My hands shook and the burned stamp on the back of my hand ached in a specific way that would later make me think of the after sensation of drawing a line with a permanent marker. A little delineation that felt like a word written just beneath the skin. In the motel, hours later, with the cheap curtains pattern of boats making a shore on my wall, I turned on the shower as hot as it would go and held my hand under it until the burn throbbed up my arm. The stamp had not washed away. It had, if anything, clarified. The edges had taken on the precision of the tip of a brand new pen. Admit one, it said. Night. Around me, the room breathed in the way all rooms do. Refrigerator compressor, someone in the room next door tapping their phone on their cheekbone. A two-note phrase came from somewhere in the plumbing, and I told myself it was pipes. I slept the sleep people sleep when they have made decisions that will require them to tell lies to their friends in order to seem reasonable. In the morning, I waited for morning. It came. The sky was ordinary. A gull landed on the motel's roof and told the world about it. My backpack was not on the chair where I had left it. The strap had been cut cleanly and tied back together with a novelty bow that had stripes. I could not remember bringing the pack with me from the fence. I could not remember leaving it there. The camera was on the dresser, though, folded with unnatural care, as if returned by the hands of someone who doesn't want anyone to know they handled art. The recorder lay beside it with a tiny bow tied around it, too. The bow tie's stripes were the same as the lark's. The camera still worked. I scrolled through the photos. The ticket booth. The carousel in the pavilion with its horses bright. The mirror maze's entry with its puzzle of letters. A photograph of me I hadn't taken, standing in the operator's booth of the Ferris wheel, looking toward the bay with my head cocked like a bird. My own camera is in my own hands in the frame. A long exposure of the midway, in which a shape moved so slowly it was more rumor than figure. The shape looked like a man in a suit with a head that was a cheerful bird's, but I could not be sure. The blur made it plausible and quarantined it in the same act. The last photo was a boy's hand with a stamp on it, the same stamp, the ink fresh. The boy held a cotton candy that had slumped into Tide, and beside him, smiling directly into the lens with a face I hadn't seen in 15 years, was my uncle, his hand on my shoulder, his other hand holding a night ticket like a priest with a host. Behind us, the lark leaned in so its beak nearly grazed my cheek. The photograph was dated in the corner in digital numerals from the camera I owned now. The metadata said it had been taken last night at 12:03 a.m. I put the camera down. The room had a mirror. I had to move to get to the sink. My reflection lifted its hand. My reflection's stamp matched mine, down to the imprecise edges of my burn. No crooked nose. My shoulders were my own. The mirror's silver had a bloom on one edge, nothing that meant anything. I looked into my own eyes for a time, and was relieved to find only my own tiredness. At noon, the world's most ordinary time, I walked to the magazine's office because if I went alone back to my own place, there was a chance I would listen for the Calliope in the radiator and find it, and then everything I had done would become my job. I handed my editor the card with the photographs, and I did not tell him any of this. He looked through the images with the face of a man who is already calculating where the images will fit in a layout. "Perfect," he said. "Exactly the mood. Motion in stillness, totally." He paused on the photograph of the boy with the stamp and my uncle and the lark. "How'd you fake this one?" he asked, more admiration than suspicion. He liked to be surprised for a living. "Found it on the wall of the prize booth," I said, "because lies want to be simple. Shot it at an angle." He nodded and handed the card back. "We'll run these next week. The night ticket one is the closer. People will go nuts." I left the office and felt a little foolish relief because sometimes ordinary life is a rope you can run your hand along while you walk in a dark place. At the corner, A busker with a toy keyboard played a song for coins cruelly slow, and when I passed him, he lifted his finger and touched the tip of his nose twice, a gesture a human makes when they are about to wink. I touched my stamp without meaning to. The skin there felt warm. The busker's keyboard picked out a two-note phrase, and I told myself the rational thing. 2 notes are the backbone of 1,000 songs, and one of them, by chance, will find its way into your day. On the 3rd night after I left the park, I woke at 3 as if the time itself had said my name. Outside my window, the city held its breath. On my bedside table, the recorder had switched itself on. The voice that came out of it was the mildest voice I've ever heard. It would have been a good voice for telling you how to get from downtown to the bay on foot without crossing any streets you didn't have to. "Night ticket," the voice said, without introduction. One admitted, "Caretaken. The park sleeps until you do not. The park wakes when you do. Keep your hands inside the car at all times." I tapped the recorder off hard enough to hurt my finger. The button kept clicking under my nail as if the recorder had decided to be a toy. I didn't go back to the amusement park. I moved apartments because moving is an old human superstition and I am as faithful to it as anyone. I put the camera in a closet for a week and then took it out because bread needs buying. The burn scar on my hand faded to the color of tea. In certain lights it looked like ink. In others it looked like the memory of ink. I tattooed over it. Thin lines of a compass rose to make a joke of it. And the artist laughed and said I had tough skin there. She had to go over the lines twice. At night, sometimes a 2-note phrase finds its way into the open window and sets itself up in my head and waits for the rest of its line to come, and it doesn't. And my heart learns to live with questions that do not resolve. Once, months later, the editor sent me a link to the published story with my photographs and the headline, "The Night Ticket." In the comments, a user named Caretaker17 had posted, "Do not feed the lark," and then, "If you go, go together." It had 1 like. The editor didn't moderate the comment because it's good to have a little texture under a story like that so the brand feels edgy. If the park wants me, it will not need my presence. I have learned that the line between the fence and the road is not a line. I keep my lights on when the sun goes down and the windows closed. I do not go to fairs. Still, once in a while, not every night, not enough to make rules, I dream of climbing the maintenance ladder on a Ferris wheel under a full, dull moon. In the dream, the city has gone very quiet, and the signs say things with full hearts, and my voice, when I speak, comes out in a whisper that passes easily through mesh. In the dream, underneath the park, a machine breathes at a slow, kind rate, as if it has learned each of us and wishes us well in the way a trap wishes a rabbit a clean sprint before a clean end. When I wake to hear 2 notes, and sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't, and neither state is comfort. If you go, if some part of your head tells the rest of you that you need to see how things look when the world has turned its face away, bring someone and hold hands and watch your reflections carefully. Do not smile back. If the stamp finds you, do not let it set. Heat can unmake ink before it comes to certainty. If you find yourself in the operator's booth, do not trust switches to be what they seem. If a black-beaked bird in a suit of friendliness points at a hole that breathes, know that it is not air you need. Above all, when you hear the Calliope ask a question, pretend that you are already full of answers. I tell myself these rules are all that stands between me and another night at the Lark's Way. I tell myself rules have weight. Sometimes, at 3 in the morning, when the city lifts its hand and pauses above its own switches, I feel the warm ink ache beneath the tattoo like a yoke. It is not a constant ache, and that is worse somehow than if it were. The voice on the recorder has not played again. I put new batteries in it last week, as if the silence meant I had defeated something. On my kitchen counter sits a brass token the size of a quarter. I did not take it. I woke up, and it was there where last night there had been an apple. "Night ticket," it says on one side, and on the other the lark smiles a painted smile and looks slightly off the center of the world. I moved it to a drawer, and sometimes it returns to the counter the way paper clips migrate back to use. Today I slid it into my pocket like a talisman while I walked to get coffee. At the cafe register, I caught myself almost handing it to the barista. and had to grip it hard enough to leave a circle on my palm. When the coin warmed and cooled against my skin with a rhythm that was not mine, I put it on the sidewalk and kept walking without watching it melt into shadow or roll to a curb or be picked up by a hand in a suit. There are afternoons when the sky over the bay goes that particular white and a gull passes and its cry dopplers a note I recognize, and I am used to it now. I do not believe in patterns, but I know what it means to be learned by a song. There are nights when I stand at my window and listen to the city put on its darkness like a jacket, and in the street below a busker plays a childlike melody on a toy keyboard that blends with a breath from the grates, and I tell myself it is nothing more than weather and music, and sometimes that is almost true. I didn't choose the apartment because it was beautiful. It wasn't. The building was a narrow, century-old row house that leaned forward as if listening to the street. The walls were tired, the floors dished, the radiators coughed in the night, but it was cheap, close to work and available, which in my city made it glamour itself. What sold me, ridiculously, was the bathroom. It had a window. After years of fanless, airless boxes that sweated mildew, the idea of a bathroom with a cracked, old sash and actual daylight felt like luxury. The landlord, a brisk woman with keys like talismans, assured me the place was well loved. I smiled, signed, and moved in on a gray Tuesday. The bathroom was small enough that when I stood by the sink, I could kick open the wobbly door with my toe. White tile climbed the walls to shoulder height, each square a little different in shade, like teeth in a neglected smile. The grout lines had the faint greenish shadow of older damp. The tub was deep, the kind you sink into with a sigh, its enamel spiderwebbed with hairline cracks that looked purple under the single overhead bulb. Above the sink there was a mirrored cabinet, the kind you open by pressing a metal tab that sticks, whose edges showed thin blooms of rust. The sash window was painted shut, its rippled glass distortions of the sky. Even on that first bright afternoon, the room felt chilly. That first night in the apartment, I slept hard and stupid, my muscles rubbery from carrying boxes up narrow stairs. Sometime past 3, I woke with a full bladder and the sense of a dream dissolving, the kind that leaves a taste like old coins. The apartment was quiet except for a soft whine from the fridge. The bathroom light hummed on after a pause. I sat relieved, the cold of the seat surprising my skin, and listened. From the vent above the toilet, where a metal grill had been painted over so many times the slats were nearly sealed, I heard it. A whisper. Not a word, exactly. More like breath discovering itself as sound. Shh, shh. I froze, my own breath arrested in my throat. Shh, I whispered back, because I'm the sort of person who apologizes to furniture when I bump it. The whisper stopped. The radiator in the hall ticked. I flushed, and the tank shuddered like a sigh. Back in bed, I told myself it had been air in the vent, or the upstairs neighbor rolling over, or the pressure in the pipes equalizing. Old buildings are symphonies of minor noises. It's part of their charm. I believed that until I woke again close to dawn with the cold conviction that someone was standing beside the bed. I jerked up, heart hammering, and saw nothing. Only the pale rectangle of the bathroom door left slightly ajar, the faintest glow from the window within making a smudgy trapezoid across the hall floor. The air felt damp. I pulled the covers to my chin and lay staring until light leaked under the shades. Daylight, of course, made a mockery of it. I showered off sleep and scrubbed the tiles with a harsh, mint-clean smell that scoured the nose. Steam swelled and coated the mirror in a gray breath. When I drew my towel across it, my face came up in streaks, and for a moment I thought one of my eyes lagged, a fraction too slow. A lazy frame dropped between movement and reflection. I wrote it off to poor sleep and the warping effect of the cabinet's old glass. The mirror had those tiny black freckles beneath the silver, constellations of rot. They made me look moth-eaten. The day was full of errands, bins, hooks, a shower curtain. I ended up grabbing a heavy vinyl curtain with a clear top band for light. That night, after I hung it, I stood in the doorway, admiring how the curve of the curtain gave the room a soft boundary, like a veil. The vent above the toilet whispered when the wind hit the building just right. It sounded like someone barely restraining laughter. That second night, the whisper came earlier, just after midnight. I had been brushing my teeth, my mouth a foam of mint, when I heard it, a hiss of syllables. I turned off the electric toothbrush. The room settled expectantly around the hum of the bulb. Ah! Eh! Hello? I said, immediately feeling stupid. Is someone there? Silence. Then, faintly, from the metal mouth of the vent, low. I stared at the grill. I could see behind the paint-choked slats darkness, dust, perhaps a glimmer of spider silk. I can hear you, I said, because adrenaline makes me obvious. The whisper thinned to a long thread, then was gone. My skin puckered with goose flesh. I spat in the sink and watched the foam slither toward the drain, its edges banding into little ripples that clung and released, clung and released. The room smelled like wet plaster. As I turned off the tap, it turned itself on again for a hiccuping second, then stopped. The pipes in the wall muttered like someone who had been interrupted. I hardly slept. The bed felt both too big and too small, and every time I drifted, the sound of breath in the vent tugged me up by the gut. When the alarm finally scolded me awake, I felt as if I had been wrestling in the dark. I called the landlord that afternoon and asked about the vent. It doesn't lead anywhere, she said. Old construction. Sometimes they put in vents that don't vent because it made tenants feel like they had fresh air. That seems not legal, I said. She made a sound that could have been a laugh. It's paint sealed. If something's getting through, it's drafts. You want I send someone to caulk it better? No, I said too quickly. I'll handle it. What did I mean by that? I wasn't sure. That evening, armed with a screwdriver and a painter's knife, I pried the grill off the wall. The paint, laid on in drizzles and drips by generations of lazy rollers, cracked like icing. Behind the grill was a rectangle of darkness. Not a shaft, as I had expected, but a shallow cavity pocketed with crumbly dust. A hide of hair from an ancient paintbrush hung like seaweed. I couldn't see where it went, because it didn't go anywhere. It was just a mouth carved into the wall above the toilet, with black space behind it. I leaned closer, my phone's flashlight cutting a square out of the dark. The light caught on something, scratches in the plaster. At first they seemed like accidental scrapes, but then my brain arranged them. A cluster of vertical stabs, then a diagonal connection between them, repeated. Letters, hacked into the soft plaster with something sharp and desperate. Don't speak your name. I jerked back so fast my elbow cracked the mirror cabinet. For a second, there was a brilliant sting of breaking glass sound before I realized the mirror hadn't shattered, just the metal tab had rattled. I stared at the vent again, feeling the words sit in my gut like a stone. Don't speak your name. I waited for laughter or for the punchline of the message, but the cavity whispered nothing, not even breath. The room was just a room again, quiet for the old bulb's thin insect hum. I taped plastic over the vent. Not elegant, just blue painter's tape and a rectangle cut from a grocery bag. I told myself it was to keep dust out. The rest of the evening I moved through the apartment with an attention that felt like tiptoeing inside my own skull. When I got ready for bed, I covered the mirror with a towel. It was something a child would do, a ward against night. I slept better, not well. On the third night, the drip started. It wasn't a leak, at least I couldn't find one. It was a single drop every few minutes, the sort of slow, internal drip you hear in the walls. I set a pot under the kitchen sink just in case and went to the bathroom to brush my teeth. When I took the towel off the mirror, the room's reflection shook itself into place, as if the light needed to pull the image across a stubborn distance. My face looked paler than usual. One eye seemed slightly larger than the other. I told myself it was the warping of the old glass again. But as I leaned closer, my mouth still enclosed, my reflection's lips parted just enough for breath to pass between them. Don't, I said to myself, out loud, like scolding a dog that isn't in the room. I draped the towel back over the cabinet. I brushed my teeth without looking. I only peeked once, at the tub, behind the curtain. The clear band at the top of the shower curtain showed the tile of the shower's back wall. I now realized the faintest suggestion of something darker than the room itself. A smudge in the corner where wall met tub. I pulled the curtain aside. Nothing. Just the drain, a metal eye with 5 round pupils, and a stray strand of hair curled like a question mark. I picked up the hair, tossed it in the wastebasket, and because I am terrified of what grows unseen, poured a cup of bleach down the drain. The smell climbed up and punched the back of my throat. For a moment I saw the strand of hair again, not gone at all, but tugging itself strand by strand down into the little black cave. I blinked. It was no longer there. That night, the whisper knew my name. I had been lying in bed with a book I wasn't reading, the words sliding uselessly off my eyes, when it came through the wall in a voice I recognized the way you recognize a silhouette. Wrong, but familiar, an echo of a friend you haven't seen in years. It said my name softly from the bathroom, like a lover calling from a doorway. The book hit the floor. Who's there? My voice trembled. I hated that it did. The bathroom door yawned a finger's width open. The light inside was off. The window bleached a pale pane. My phone's flashlight made a thin spear of light that painted the hallway in blue. I stopped at the bathroom threshold and angled the light in. The mirror was a dark rectangle under the towel. The shower curtain hung with its faint plastic smell. The taped vent looked dull and harmless. A droplet hung fat on the end of the faucet as if waiting to fall. The whisper came again, patient. My name. It came from everywhere. The vent, the drain, the seam where wall met ceiling, spreading itself thin through the room's corners. I didn't answer. I stood, trying to feel my own breath and not the room's, trying to count my inhalations like I had learned from a meditation app. And then I shouted, sudden and foolish, "Who are you? Who are you?" For a moment there was absolutely nothing. Then from the mirror, no breath, no voice, just a finger's broad stroke through steam that was not there. Letters wrote themselves in backward capitals. Neat as a child practicing, "Ho are you?" The towel still hung over the cabinet, interior side pressed to the glass. I could see its outline, damp, from where my showers had misted it the last 2 days. There was no surface for condensation. Yet the letters were there, perfectly written, and then the towel twitched, a small, deliberate movement. It didn't fall. It just corrected itself, like a living thing disturbed by the memory of wind. I closed the door. I left the light off. I slept on the couch, the kind of sleep that is a standoff. I faced the bathroom door the whole night, and the door faced me, and between us was the tension of a wire. Morning brought a brittle sort of courage. I told myself that I had been very tired, that stress and moving and a sugar crash from the vending machine dinner could create a mind theater from nothing. I had seen videos like that, pareidolia in the bathroom tiles, faces in stains. Brains are meaning engines and will grind anything into narrative. I went to the hardware store and bought a new bulb, claiming the flicker of the old one made me queasy. I came home, put on loud music, and replaced the bulb, my fingers steady until they weren't. When I twisted the base of the new bulb into the socket, the light came up antiseptic and instant. The bathroom popped into high fidelity. The grout lines I had scrubbed shone. The shower curtain, clean and milky, offered a ghost of the tub's curve behind it. In this light, the towel over the mirror looked silly. I took it down. I met my reflection looking like a version of me that had not slept much. The freckles beneath the silver had blossomed in the night. They constellated around my eyes like galaxies in 2 separate mirrors. I lifted my left hand. The reflection lifted its right. Everything normal, ordinary as gravity. I let my breath out. I turned my face side to side like an actor checking for a good profile. The reflection did too. Then, just barely, in the small stutter of a blink, it winked at me. I staggered back, and the tub's edge caught me behind the knee, so I sat more than fell. The shower curtain's cold plastic kissed my cheek. Behind that translucent veil, the tile corner was darker, the way a room's corner looks darker when you suspect something in it. A smell rose, as if from deep in the drain. Far iron like pennies, salt, the yeasty ripeness of a damp towel that never dries. The hair at the nape of my neck lifted. I tore the curtain aside. In the tub where the drain was, there was another drain. Not literally, but the way the light fell made it seem as if there were a circle darker than the porcelain, as if the tub was a lens and the world behind it was a different room entirely. I leaned closer. My phone's flashlight sliced the dark into white. The circle shrank to a simple metal grate. My own reflection haloed the drain, my face, pale, my eyes wide, the flash of my teeth where my mouth had drawn back into a fearful grin. "Stop," I told myself. "Stop, stop." The mirror showed me, behind me, over my shoulder, the bathroom door. It was closed. It had been open a second ago. I hadn't touched it. Something small tapped the window. A bug, I told myself, a moth. The sky beyond looked the color of pewter. Rain threatened. I stood slowly. I made it to the sink. I put both palms on the cool enamel. The mirror hung above my head, full of my motion. "My name is," I started, and then I clamped my mouth shut so fast my teeth knocked. "Don't speak your name." The new bulb hummed. The silvery freckles around my reflection's eyes seemed to thicken and coalesce. They didn't form shapes. They formed insisting almost shapes, like a face behind a screen. The glass appeared deeper than it should be. It was a trick of layering, of light, of old resilience in silver. I knew that. And yet a second jawline seemed to bloom beneath mine. A second mouth, slightly parted, the suggestion of a tongue that wasn't shaped quite right. That night, because it did become night as quickly as turning, as if the day's hours sloughed off me like water, I ran the shower as hot as it would go. Steam filled the room, climbed the walls, gathered in the upper corners like nesting birds. I stood outside the tub, listening to the hiss of water beat tile. The mirror fogged opaque. I didn't look at it. I watched the place where the curtain met the wall. The smudge there had a depth to it now. I told myself it was mildew blooming under new humidity. That explanation sat on the surface of my mind like plastic on deep water. The whisper came through steam, my name, softened to a child's approximation. It was patient, curious. "You," it said when I didn't answer. You. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice hoarse with heat. "Me," it said. The curtain swayed, though there was no draft. The water arced steady where it struck the porcelain and turned into the violent foam of a creek. I stepped closer, my fingers gripping the curtain so hard the hooks pinged against the rod. I wanted to pull it back and see the tub empty and clean and laugh at myself. I wanted to pull it back and have it be anything else but the thing I feared it would be. "Don't speak your name," I whispered to myself. The curtain billowed. A hand, or something like a hand, pressed against the plastic from the other side. No palm lines, no fingernails, just the suggestion of 5 lengths that tapered like root tips. The plastic dimpled under the pressure of those blunt ends and then impossibly began to discolor, darkening, as if whatever was on the other side was wet and bleeding into it. The mark traced itself like ink through paper. It smelled like the bottom of a mop bucket a week after the cleaning crew forgets to dump it. My gorge rose. I yanked the curtain back. The tub was empty. The water gushed into the drain with the single-mindedness of a river finding its mouth. It was louder than it should have been. The drain seemed larger, a black ring. I jammed my finger into the center and found the metal grate, as always, cool and slick. But the sound that came up through the metal, when I blocked it, changed. It shifted from a rushing to a breath, and then to words. "Let me out." I raised my hand, dripping. On my skin, caught in the whorls of my fingerprints, were specks. Not dirt, not hair. Tiny fragments of black that looked like shadow given grit. I scrubbed my fingers under the stream. The fragments smeared like charcoal and were gone. The mirror behind me spoke in glass. I didn't hear it so much as feel it answer. The fog on the surface furred forward. A sentence wrote itself in the condensation as if by the swipe of a cloth. "Say your name." I do think, that if I had been my best self, if I had been any version of myself other than the one that had been woken in the night for days by whispers and worn down by the mileage of my own fear, I would have run. I would have left the bathroom, the apartment, the building, and taken my phone and my wallet and caught a bus to anywhere. Instead, I did what frightened animals do and backed into a corner. I bared my teeth. I grabbed the glass cleaner, blue, sharp as winter, and sprayed it into the mirror until it ran. I wiped it with paper towels and furious swipes that squealed. The glass shone. It showed me, pink-cheeked and wild-eyed and damp. It showed nothing else but the old freckles in the silver. It almost calmed me. Then, behind my left shoulder in the reflection, the bathroom door opened a few inches. I did not hear it open in the real room. I wheeled and it was closed. My reflection smiled, a slow, sly thing, and I felt my own mouth not move. The shape behind the mirror stepped forward. We met in that thin place where the skin of my world thins and the skin of another presses back. It didn't look like me, not quite. It looked like what something in the walls might make if it had only my shadow and my breath to learn from. The face was almost right, but the eyes were dull coins underwater, and the mouth never truly closed. Its hair hung in the suggestion of strands, but never separated. The angle of its shoulders was wrong, like a drawing done from memory. It pressed its palm, its root tips, against the glass, and the glass bowed inward, a breath from breaking. "Don't," I said again. "Do," it breathed, and I realized with a cold clarity that grew like frost from the edges of my mind inward that it wasn't asking for my name to know me. It was offering me mine, like you offer a cat a length of string. It wanted a tether. It wanted an anchor to drag itself out. The shower hissed, the steam thickening with urgency. The room was a wound in the house, open and wet. The drain drank greedily. Every surface sweated. The smell of iron was stronger now. I reached for the faucet to turn off the water, and the hot handle would not move. It was as if a hand on the other side of the wall held it open. The mirrored thing cocked its head, mimicking the motion, its eyes slipping out of sync like bad film. The vent tape flapped once and then lay still. The glass hummed as if something sang a note in it. "Tell me," it said, and in the saying was a horrible, lonely hunger. "Tell me, tell me, tell me, tell me!" No. The word came out of me like a strike. I grabbed the plunger from behind the toilet, not a weapon, exactly, but a tool, and dove it into the tub over the drain. I pushed down, the rubber bell sealed. I pulled up with both hands and hips, and the plunger bucked. The drink of the drain changed. The voice from it rose to a thin keening. I slammed the plunger down again. The mirror cracked. A line sprang across the glass from bottom left to top right, hair thin and silvered. The thing behind the mirror opened its mouth too wide. Water slopped in the tub, soaking my shoes. The plunger made that obscene sucking sound that renders all heroics ridiculous, but the drain's pull changed tone again, moving from the greedy to the thwarted. I pumped the plunger, sweat running into my eyes, and the mirror, perhaps insulted by the entire unglamorous scene, cracked again. This time a tiny triangle fell out and pinged in the sink, a miniature shard with my warped face in it. Through that missing piece I saw not the dark behind the cabinet, but a deeper dark, like a hallway with edges that bent wrong. "Don't speak your name," I gasped, not sure who I was commanding. Something in the mirror, no, something in me, screamed. The drain burped. Then the water began to recede, reluctantly. The plunger released with a final fart that, if I hadn't been on my knees shaking, would have been funny. The shower's hiss dwindled to a thin thread. I turned off the tap. The handle moved this time, grudging and then willing. The bathroom breathed. It inhaled the steam and exhaled a small, defeated silence. The mirror hung there, wounded. In the fracture lines, my face spidered into a dozen strangers. The towel bar had slumped a few degrees, defeated by humidity. The taped vent's edges curled. The smell of iron receded to the mere metallic of old pipes. On the mirror, in no condensation I could see and no moisture I could feel, a new sentence wrote itself, slow and graceful as if the letters enjoyed arriving. "I'm not in the mirror." I stood so slowly I felt each vertebra articulate. Behind me, the door stayed a door. The window was a window. The curtain was only a curtain caught on the tub's lip. The drain gurgled a final guilty little cough. I whispered my name into my own mouth with my lips closed, the way children whisper secrets to the inside of their palms. I did not let it out. I left the bathroom light on and slept on the couch again, sitting up until the sun turned the windows the color of underripe pears. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt water moving in slow circles just out of sight, like something thinking. In the morning, I called the landlord and told her the mirror was cracked. She sighed and said she'd send someone in the afternoon. I didn't tell her what else I'd seen. I didn't tell her about the words in the vent cavity, or the blowing towel, or the thing that almost had my shape. She would have sent a man with a toolbox and a story to tell his girlfriend at dinner. And what would he have found but a cracked mirror and an old drain and a tenant with a tired face? While I waited, I covered the mirror again, this time with duct tape in a web until the whole thing was a matte gray shield. The room felt quieter with it blinded. I taped the vent with fresh plastic double-layered. I cleaned the tub until my knuckles stung. I ran cold water to hear what it sounded like when it wasn't trying to eat. The sound was simply water. In the end, the mirror man didn't show. A voicemail arrived. "Car trouble, tomorrow instead." I spent the evening in the kitchen with the radio on, the bathroom door closed. Sometimes in a house, you can decide a room is not part of the house for a while. You can make yourself a smaller place to be safe within. I went to the bathroom quickly and refused to look anywhere but where I put my feet. When I lay down, finally, I left the radio's lowest murmur on. The apartment hummed. The bathroom behind its door and tape and web hummed too. When I dozed, I dreamed of standing water, clear and shallow, reflecting a sky that wasn't mine. In the water was my face, and above my face, clouds moved separately from where they should. I woke to my name in my ear, not spoken but thought, pressed into the space behind my teeth. The bathroom door was open again. I rose, slow. I walked to it. The new bulb inside cast a steady pool of light across the threshold. The mirror was blind behind tape. The vent's plastic was still. The tub was empty. The curtain did not move. On the tiled wall, high near the ceiling where I wouldn't have noticed if I weren't held there by terror, were small black marks, mold spots I hadn't scrubbed because I hadn't looked that high. They had arranged themselves into a patient message. No strokes through steam, no theatricality. Just lined dots like the freckles in the silver had been, only now telling me something I wanted to unknow. Hello, my name. I didn't say it. I didn't, and I won't write it here. That is mine. The marks didn't need me to speak to learn it. They had taken it from the little noises a person makes alone, the way you mutter your name at the end of a voicemail, the way you introduce yourself to your own face before an interview, down in the chest where you think words. They had taken it from the wet of my fear, the condensation bearing my outline again and again. The house had been listening and learning in the smallest sounds. Something moved in the ceiling, a drag of weight like a bag of sand. The light flickered and recovered. A drip fell into the tub that had not been water and left no trace. Okay, I said to the empty, which was no longer empty. My voice sounded like an adult's voice when they promise nothing bad will happen. Okay, I live here, for now. The mirror is gone. The landlord finally swapped it for a new one with clean, bright glass that shows me in proper proportions. The tape and towel are gone too. The vent remains sealed. I run the fan I bought myself. The hum is a clean noise that masks whispers only the way a curtain masks a shape. The shower sings the way showers sing. The grout is brighter. Visitors say the bathroom feels bigger. At night, when I brush my teeth, I do not look into the corners. I do not watch the reflected door in the mirror's distance. I listen to my breath going in and out like a prayer I refuse to know the words to. I speak aloud about the most boring things I can think of, milk expiry dates, email subject lines, to muddy the water. I never say my name. Sometimes, when the house leans forward to hear the street, the bathroom leans forward too, like lips to a glass. When that happens, the new light hums an old note. The tile's pallor takes on a depth like the color of a bruise, and somewhere, under the enamel skin of the tub, under the ceiling paint in the vent, in the reaches of the wall where coats of years have made stalactites and small caverns, something that looks almost like me waits with its mouth slightly open. Sometimes, late, I hear it call, not with voice or breath, but with the memory of both, a not sound. A word pressed to the inside of my name like a hand to a window. It whispers the syllables of the person who lives here in the way a sheet remembers a body. When I answer, I do it by turning on the cold water and letting it run until the pipes shudder and the building murmurs back. I do it with small, unimportant songs under my breath, with the brush rasping my teeth, with laughter at nothing that sounds human and therefore too complex to imitate. Sometimes, too, I set a glass of water on the back of the toilet tank before bed, as if for a guest who comes thirsty through impossible halls. In the morning, the water is always at the same level. I tell myself that means something, that it means I am safe, that it means the thing in the walls cannot drink me unless I help. Most nights I believe myself. On the others, I keep my name behind my teeth and dream of a bathroom like mine, but polished to a mirror's depth, where a person who looks like me smiles with her mouth never quite closing and writes backwards messages in nothing at all. On those nights, I wake standing in the doorway with my hand on the light switch, and I have to decide again, every time, whether the light will make the room more real or the shadows will. I have learned to live with the decision. That is the ending I have for now. Whether it is resolved or open Depends, I suppose, on which side of the glass you think I'm on.